After 9 months of a convoluted impeachment process, it took fewer than 3 minutes of actual voting to seal the fate of Dilma Rousseff, Brazil's first female president. The 81 senators pushed their buttons and the electronic panel confirmed the much-anticipated defeat of the suspended president.
I will now declare the results. A total of 81 senators cast their votes. There were no abstentions. 61 voted for the impeachment. 20 senators voted against the impeachment.
But allies of Rousseff still managed to secure a lesser victory. In a separate vote, the senators decided not to strip her entirely of her political rights. Instead of being barred for 8 years, she could run for office in the next election, something normally not granted to an impeached president.
Rousseff was not convicted of corruption. The notion that someone convicted for alleged budget issues could also be stripped of political rights would make this an even more unreasonable punishment.
Just a couple of hours after the impeachment vote, then interim President Michel Temer walked onto the same Senate floor to be sworn in as the country's leader.
I promise to uphold, defend and abide by Brazil's constitution, observe the laws, promote the well-being of the Brazilian people and promote Brazil's unity, integrity and independence.
Nevertheless, Dilma Rousseff and her supporters remained defiant. A couple hundred people went to the Alvorada Palace, the official presidential residence, to show their support as Rousseff delivered a statement to the media. She repeated she was the victim of injustice and called on her allies to keep up the fight.
Do not give up the fight, hear me? They think they won, but they've got it wrong. I know we will all fight. There'll be a kind, tireless, and energetic opposition that a government born from a coup deserves.
Hello again. I'm really happy to have you here in this new class on the history of Brazil in English. Well, we have just watched this brief video that basically portrayed the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff and the official inauguration of presidency term, of this new presidency term with Michel Temer, who happened to be Dilma Rousseff's vice president. Well, I can tell you that that was a very turbulent period of the country's democratic history. Yes, Michel Temer served as president of Brazil from August 31st, 2016 to December 31st, 2018. And as I said, that was a very turbulent period of the Brazilian history, right? So basically, his administration emerged from a profound political rupture caused by the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff. So if you watched our previous class on the presidential term of Dilma Rousseff, you will remember that Dilma Rousseff assumed as president of Brazil in a time when the international scenario was not that good anymore. And that caused her great trouble because as she inherited the political administration of President Lula, which only worked well as long as the international scenario was positive and favorable. Well, since that was not the case anymore because the political scenario was not good, just remember 2009, 2010, even 2008, right? So President Lula was already having a hard time by the end of his second term as president. So when Dilma Rousseff assumed the presidency of the country was already not in a good moment. And because she was a technocrat, and many people said that she was like bossy and she was not really good in terms of negotiating with the legislative power, her problems increased a great deal during her first term, and in the second term, there were rumors of corruption, and considering that, the people in general was really greatly insatisfied with her, we had all this thing, this favorable scenario for her impeachment, and that ended up happening and becoming a reality. Yeah, she was impeached, and now we have a country that had suffered, that had undergone a deep political rupture because of this impeachment, and that was a country that was also undergoing economic recession, institutional instability, and even worse, widespread politic, political and public distrust by investors and political elites. So Michel Temer's presidency was not only controversial because of its origin, right? After all, he was a president that did not have really much support, and unlike the first impeachment that we had with President Collor, which was clearly correct, accurate, in this case, the entire nation was divided, because it sounded like a political coup, right? So we had a nation that was divided. Right-wing voters really wanted a fresh, new experience with a right-wing president. And at the same time, as we said, Dilma Rousseff was really difficult. She was a president that was not popular. And so we had all this very complicated situation that resulted in her impeachment, and that injured the country as a whole. So President Temer was amid, all of this chaotic scenario. Here we have a picture of him, and it says Temer inherited a severe recession and adopted a market-oriented agenda focused on fiscal discipline. Yes, this is basically what we are going to see President Temer trying to do in the beginning, right? He's going to try to recover the nation, to recover Brazil from this severe recession by implementing this market-oriented agenda that preached, above all, fiscal discipline, austerity, right? Now, that was a tough task. Although the impeachment followed constitutional procedures, as I said, the Brazilian society was divided, and it was very difficult to be a president in this environment. Well, basically, right in the beginning, we had, as I said, Brazil had experienced consecutive years of negative GDP growth. That is bad for a country, right? Also, industrial output had declined, and we had a severe fiscal imbalance. So President Temer worked on this private cabinet formed by technocrats. So again, President Temer will not demonstrate a human approach. He will just be surrounded by technocrats that are people just worried about numbers, figures, and also he was supported by conservative politicians. And these conservative politicians, particularly economists, basically they rejected the developmental and interventionist model that Dilma Rousseff applied and practiced many times. So that was a very strong characteristic of the Workers' Party policy, right? So the whole thing began, I would say, in an emblematic way with the Constitutional Amendment 95, commonly known as the Spending Cap Amendment, or Teto de Gastos in Portuguese, right? We have here, let me see if I have a picture. No, we don't have a picture here. But anyways, basically it was approved in December 2016, right? And it froze federal primary spending in real terms for 20 years. For 20 years. That is a lot, right? That is a lot, really. So the government argued that the measure was necessary, indispensable to restore fiscal credibility, to reduce public debt, and to regain investor confidence in the country, right? Now, obviously, the critics, they said that, such a long-term freeze, would undermine the constitutional right to health, to education, to social welfare, and that would impact the poorer layers of the population, right? So President Temer was pretty much living among, all this criticism and this inclination towards conservative agendas. So basically, after that, we had the labor reform. That was something that had been discussed in other occasions, but now, since the country was undergoing severe recession, that thing became alive again. More and more, the government was realizing that the previous structure, the previous labor structure, was not harmonized with the current situation of the country, with the current context of the world, right? So in 2017, Brazil approved the most extensive changes to labor legislation since the 40s. Yes. So the reform allowed collective agreements to override legal norms in several areas. Expanded outsourcing. Yes, that is a problem. If you depend on outsourced service, you know what I'm talking about. This reform also reduced mandatory trade union funding. And that is something that will impact left-wing people, left-wing politicians, right, and their agenda. And also, during this time, because of this act of President Temer, we are going to see an increased flexibility, in hiring and firing practice. So more and more, obviously, for entrepreneurs, for companies, business people, that was good, right? Because it is not easy in a country like Brazil with so many taxes, to have all this, I would say, all this bureaucracy involved in hiring and firing employees. So they loved, all this news. But although the supporters saw, those changes with good eyes, opponents argued that those changes they would weaken. Those changes would weaken labor protections, and they would favor precarious employment conditions. Well, this is what was going on. So Temer This is what we see here in the description of the picture. Temer is generally seen as a transitional president who passed structural reforms without popular support. That's the precise way of defining President Temer as a president. So here, what you have, here, what you can see basically is people complaining, is people shouting at the government that they do not accept, especially this labor changes that were being supported by President Temer. Another thing that happens is that Temer also sought to reform Brazil's pension system. This is something that is still nowadays is being discussed in our in the term of former President Bolsonaro. There were talks, there were intents of really working on the pension system, but this is a very, very complicated target because it's been around the way it is for a while. But definitely, here with President Temer, a great effort was made towards changing the pension system, right? And the reasons why, the reasons why they wanted to change that is because, there were unsustainable deficits driven by demographic aging. So the population was changing, and that was being a way too heavy burden on the Brazilian economy, sustaining the pension system the way it was and the way it still is, considering all the deficits it's undergoing because of the changes in the demographic scenario of Brazil, was really tough. That was really tough for the government. So the proposed reform included raising the minimum retirement age and tightening eligibility criteria. This is what we are seeing nowadays. We'll be talking about, the current scenario in terms of pension system in future classes, okay? But obviously, that was not an easy process, as I said, because Temer would have to face labor union opposition, social movements like this one that you're seeing here in the picture, and parts of the Congress that prevented its approval during his term. So also, just like President Lula and President Dilma, we have the big monster of corruption showing up again. Yes, there were corruption allegations throughout the entire presidency term of Michel Temer. And the pinnacle of these allegations took place in 2017 when secret recordings released by businessman Joesley Batista, great guy here in Brazil, a very powerful businessman in Brazil, appeared, to implicate Temer in schemes involving bribery and obstruction of justice. So, as a consequence, we have here, a very, very tough process that Michel Temer had to endure and had to go through. And although Temer denied wrongdoing, the revelations were intensified more and more and ended up eroding his legitimacy. Yes, he survived the process. He ended up surviving the process. But the Chamber of Deputies blocked formal charges against Temer on 2 occasions, allowing him to remain in office. So yes, his legitimacy was eroded, but at the end of the day, he survived because, the Supreme Federal Court blocked these formal charges against him on 2 occasions. That doesn't mean that he survived politically. He survived in his office. He could go into the end of his term, but really his image was totally wiped out after this incident. And even before his term, he would be prosecuted. He would face many charges because during his term as president, he was like shielded, armored, against these accusations. But once he became just, a normal guy, not president anymore, he had to face his accusations. And somehow, this is the impression I have, that somehow these accusations along the time just got vaporized. Strange, really strange. Anyways, so in foreign policy, Temer aimed to rebrand Brazil as a pragmatic and fiscally responsible actor on the international stage. So Temer tried to reconquer, all this political space that was gained, that had been gained during the Lula 2 terms, and that was kind of stained now, because of all this recession, this corruption allegations. So, basically, his government emphasized trade liberalization, rapprochement with the United States and the European Union, and also, above all, efforts to re-include and to conclude the Mercosur European Union trade agreements. Let me see if I have pictures here. Yeah, those are some pictures of him in this international effort, in this international foreign policy efforts to try to make Brazil gain, space again. Here you have Michel Temer's meeting, or Michel Temer meeting international leaders during official diplomatic visits that in most cases, guys, were just useless, to be honest. They were really, really useless. So, well, by the end of his term, Temer was widely viewed as a transitional president. The reforms he passed were quote unquote successful, and they managed, to meet the demands by financial markets and conservative factors, but he failed in terms of achieving social consensus, or even worse than that, political legitimacy. He was far, from attaining political legitimacy. And, the combination of all these corruption scandals, this austerity policy, and also, this fiscal discipline thing, and, social protection between institutional continuity and political trust, all of that really stained his image here in Brazil. So somehow his government reshaped Brazil's policy landscape, yes, but at the end of the day, when he finished his term, Brazil paid a high price in terms of polarization, political polarization, and public disillusionment, with politics. Now, more and more we would find a Brazilian people that was totally frustrated with politics, with presidents, and more we have this two poles, left and right. And this is a time, guys, when the social media is stronger than ever. And the social media worked as, as gasoline being thrown into fire to put, these two poles even further from each other. Right now in Brazil, what we see is really these two poles hating each other. And that is a very bad thing and that makes it difficult for any president to govern the country. I hope you have enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like it. Don't forget to share it and consider the possibility of subscribing to my channel so that you may always be updated with the new videos that I'm constantly launching, okay? Thank you so much. Let me go back here to my full screen. And I hope to see you in our next video on the history of Brazil in English. Bye-bye.